Hello friends and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. I'm in Ipswich this month and I'm going to talk about something I've actually tried to talk about before. I've made a video on this and not published it because I got scared, because today I want to talk about 13 things that every BDSM producer should know and which they don't know. So I would say please, if you ever tie up models or spank models or anything like that at work, please don't think this video doesn't apply to you. I'm not talking about super advanced skills. I'm talking about the things that everyone who does anything like this with a model should know. I hope people will take this video seriously because I am a professional model who's been being tied up and spanked on camera for almost 20 years, but I am also a professional bondage rigger. I've been tying models up for well over a decade, and I also employ models. I know that sometimes when I make videos that involve an element of criticism of the people who hire models, sometimes it makes some photographers very angry. Last time I put up a video in any way like this, I got someone on Purple Port saying basically, how dare you criticise people who pay you. But I think if we don't criticise the people who pay us, the people who pay us can harm us. And for people who make a living from how they look, it's especially important that we escape our shoots undamaged. So here are the 13 things every BDSM producer should know. And I want to reassure you that none of these are one-offs. I've had many strange experiences in my career, and some of them were just freak incidents, and I've not included them. I've only included anything in my list if it's happened to me multiple times and if I'm aware of it having happened to other models as well. So I am really honestly talking about things that are fairly common occurrences. I wish I wasn't, because some of these should not by any means be common. But nevertheless, here we are. I just really hope that by making this video I can keep other models a little safer. So if you are a producer watching this, I hope that you maybe learn something if you're not already doing all of these things correct. And if you're a model watching this, I hope it encourages you to just be assertive. If someone is doing one of these things wrong at a shoot, or if there's something else that worries you, you should speak up. The fact that we're being paid doesn't negate our responsibility to ourselves to end the shoot safe and well. If you are tying up anyone, model or not, and you don't have safety scissors, you should not be tying anyone up. Now, I say safety scissors and I mean safety scissors. The sharp-ended scissors are not safe for cutting rope off bodies with. Sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but most of the people I have done bondage with at shoots over the years have not had safety scissors. Some of them have had scissors, but they have not had ones which are particularly safe. And twice, on 2 occasions during my career, I've had something go wrong in bondage and the photographer has had no equipment with him and has tried to cut me out of rope with a kitchen knife, and I'm sure you don't need to be any kind of rigger to understand that that is an incredibly dangerous and stupid situation to be in. Safety scissors will cost you way less than your rope will cost you, even if you buy cheap rope, and there's just no excuse to be tying up a human being if you don't have safety scissors. To reassure you, having scissors isn't an admission that you're no good and you're likely to do stuff wrong. The most proficient, able, ambitious riggers and producers I work with are the ones with the most safety equipment around. So don't feel it will make you look like an amateur. It will not. It will make you look prepared. And when I'm being immobilized by someone else for money, I really like it that they're prepared. Unfortunately, it's very rare to hear anyone do this. I think I've only been tied up by 2 people who've ever asked. Before you tie a model up, or anyone, ask them about any injuries. This is particularly relevant if you're working with a new model or a model who is new to bondage or BDSM, because she might not know enough yet to volunteer that information. There are lots of injuries that you can work around in bondage, and having injuries doesn't mean that you can't do bondage work. I've got several long-standing dance-related injuries and I've still had a long career in the field of BDSM. But as a model, if you don't tell the producer, they may not know. And as a producer or rigger, if you don't ask, you're not really fulfilling your basic duty of care to that model. You're the one who knows what the shoot is going to involve better than her. So you are in a very good position to change things if you find out that she's got an injury that needs to be accommodated. In my career, it's been very rare that I've been asked, but I make a point of asking every single model I ever tie up before any rope goes onto them. And sometimes I discover some really surprising things that can be easily accommodated because I know. So you've got your safety scissors, you've got your model, you've got your rope, you've asked if she's got any injuries, and the shoot's ready to start. Now, I've lost count of how many times this has happened to me, especially with people who are into bondage and are excited about having a model to tie up. Often, because the bondage is the exciting bit, it's the thing they do first. But because there is almost always a time limit for how long someone can stay tied up, obviously that time limit gets shorter and shorter the more ambitious and difficult the tie. You really don't want to be tying your model up before you've set up the lights. It sounds incredibly obvious, but doing the light testing and the camera testing, make sure everything is in place to work before you immobilise your collaborator, is a really good idea. And unfortunately, it's something I see people making mistakes with over and over again. And the message it sends to the model, rightly or wrongly, is that you don't care that much about her welfare. If you're prepared to completely tie her up and then start faffing with your lights and realising that you've not got your battery and your flash head or whatever, I don't know what you do. I'm sorry, I don't know what you do because I don't pay attention to the technical aspects of shoots. But it's really important that you are tying the model up last and then untying her first at the end of the shoot, because for those of us who like bondage, the immobilisation is a really exciting part of it. It's very easy to go for the part of the bondage that makes it most exciting. So quite often that means the rigger tying my hands, because that's what makes it bondage. And actually, if you can, quite often it's very sensible to tie the hands last, because hands are the part of the human body that seem to go numb the quickest very often in bondage. So leaving hands till last when the design of the rope allows for it is really good practice, and I think it sends a message to the model that you care. Now, this is hideously obvious and yet very, very rare. You should always establish a safe word, and you should establish it before anyone gets tied up. If your model is someone who hasn't done bondage or BDSM before, she might not be aware of safe wording as a thing, but you just need to make sure she has some means, and it doesn't really matter what it is, there are so many options, to tell you if something's wrong. Now, obviously, if she's tied up but not gagged, that's going to be really easy. She can just say, my hands are going numb. But even though it is technically easy, I think it's a really good idea to point out to the model that that's something you would be happy to hear her do. Because I think especially new hesitant models who are new to the genre, I think we often don't want to seem like divas, we don't want to seem unwilling, and so being given explicit permission to tell the rigger or the producer if something starts to feel uncomfortable is a really welcome thing to be told. If your model is going to be tied up and gagged, you might need to figure out a more sophisticated safe word. So my safe word, if I can speak, is a safe word because you can't miss it. But my safe word, if I can't speak, is a repeated sound like this, which doesn't really sound like anything that you would naturally do in a shoot. And occasionally, if someone is going to be really, like completely hooded and gagged and blindfolded and everything, sometimes as an alternative to a safe word, we have something in our hand that we drop if we need help. So there are lots and lots of options, but the conversation is, I think, the most important bit. It's to let the model know that she has the option always to basically call cut or ask for a break if anything is unexpected and goes wrong. There's a lot of information online about bondage safety, and there are many tutorials that will teach you about rope placement and how to maximise your safety in that regard. But I want to talk about the most basic thing of all, because the most common injury in bondage, as far as I have experienced, is people falling over. It's very simple, it's very basic, but it's very easy to tie someone up in a way that they are unsafe because of the simple risk of falling over or falling off furniture. So it's not difficult to avoid these things, you just need to think ahead. So for example, don't tie someone to furniture that isn't stable. I've had people try to tie me to standard lamps, to light folding chairs, to all sorts of things that aren't particularly stationary or stable. And it means the chances of your model falling over are a great deal higher. Don't tie rope around the neck if there's nothing else that would break the model's fall. You really don't want a model falling over when the only thing that's going to stop her hitting the ground is rope around her neck. And I'm sure I don't need to explain to anyone why that's a problem, but I've had people try to do that to me on multiple occasions at shoots. Don't tie people standing up with no support. If their feet and knees are tied, for example, their balance is going to be compromised, and if they're not tied to something stable, they could just fall over. Consider the worst that can happen if they do fall and do what you can to mitigate that. For example, a soft surface. For example, making sure you do have secure attachment points. If there's any chance that weight could be put on something, it needs to be secure. I'm not just talking about deliberate suspensions, but something that wasn't meant to be a suspension can turn into a suspension really quickly if someone falls. I have had multiple times, again, I'm not talking about rare events, I have had people try to tie me in a semi-suspension to an ordinary light fitting. Now I weigh 74 kilograms. It shouldn't be difficult to figure out that a regular light bulb fitting is not going to hold my weight, and yet I think people get excited shoot blindness and sometimes just forget that something that will support a domestic light is not going to support 74 kilograms of model, or indeed anyone. So if you're in doubt, test it with your own weight with no one tied up. You should not be tying a model to a light fitting or to a flimsy standard lamp or to a hanging basket hook. These are not sensible choices. Some things can't be improvised. BDSM equipment can be hideously expensive, and I know it's really tempting to make this stuff for yourself. And sometimes you can. Some household items can be pressed into service in BDSM shoots perfectly safely and easily. Clothes pegs are a good example, wooden spoons are a good example for spanking. But a heavy custom-made spanking bench does not function the same as a light flimsy folding chair, and tying someone over it will have safety implications that using the correct equipment would not have. If you don't have the correct equipment, consider compromising with your idea rather than compromising with the equipment, because when you compromise with equipment, you compromise with safety in some situations. Don't compromise a model's safety by substituting items that are not fit for the purpose. A garden cane will not do the same thing as a BDSM cane that was designed for that. Bungee cord doesn't function in the same way as rope. And several of the injuries I've experienced as a bondage model have simply been because of someone trying to economise, which I totally understand, but then trying to do something they've seen online with specialist equipment that they try to replicate with stuff they got from B&Q. Sometimes you can and sometimes you can't, but if you're a beginner, it's a much safer option to use the standard equipment rather than try to go off-piste. I hate talking about this one, but it has to be said, when you're tying up a model, you should aim for minimal physical contact rather than seeing it as an opportunity to maximise your physical contact with the model. I wish I didn't have to say this, I wish this wasn't a phenomenon, but it most certainly is, and it's one I've experienced many, many times. Now, I don't necessarily mean that people are tying up models and then non-consensually groping them. It can be a lot more subtle than that. It can be tying up your model, then resting your hand on her knee while you finish the story you were telling her while you were tying her up. This has happened to me multiple times. And for the love of God, do not use our tied up bodies to lever yourself back up off the floor if you've been tying us down there. That has happened to me a lot. It feels so disrespectful. Now, models often won't tell you if they're uncomfortable with the level that you're touching them, because they're either too polite or they're too scared. But I promise you, we will notice, because we can tell the difference between someone touching us when it's absolutely strictly necessary and someone who is touching us because they think they can get away with it because they're working in a genre where some physical contact is necessary. Don't mistake our good manners or our fear for compliance with this, it's not acceptable and it's never acceptable. BDSM at shoot, just like BDSM in real life, is about trust. And if you betray that trust, you'll shortly find yourself with a whole load of models who don't want to be tied up by you again. This is another one I really shouldn't have to say, but there we are. Minimise the possibility of surprises during a shoot. So here are some examples of things that have happened to me. Someone tying me up and then getting what turned out to be a fake knife out and threatening me with it. We'd not discussed weapons, we'd not discussed whether the weapons were real or not. I had not expected any such thing. Something that could be totally okay if you've communicated it beforehand becomes a great big problem in some cases if you just introduce it without discussing. If you realise you've already got your model tied up and gagged and you've not asked her about an element of the shoot, you need to skip that element rather than suddenly bring it in without discussing it with her. And you shouldn't be negotiating anything with a model who's already tied up. It's not fair. Leaving the room. Once you've got a tied up model or a tied up person in any situation, you should not be leaving the room. Again, it comes down to preparation. If you've thought everything through that you're going to need, the chances of you needing to leave the room are very, very slight. But if you haven't planned ahead and you've just gone straight for the bit you wanted to do, which was tie the model up, the chances of you needing stuff from other rooms is much higher, and it's really best avoided. Extra people on set. Make sure the model knows if anyone else is going to arrive during the shoot. It can be really disconcerting. Similarly, animals. Some of us love animals, some of us do not. Having a dog suddenly turn up when you're hogtied on the floor might be the best thing in the world, or it might be absolutely terrifying. So just remember, either keep your animals out of your shooting space or introduce your model to the animals before she's tied up. Taking phone calls, it should go without saying, but if you've already got a model tied up and your phone rings, the thing you should ignore is the phone, not the model. And this stuff should be self-evident, but unfortunately it really isn't, so I'm saying it now. This won't be applicable to everyone, but it will be applicable to plenty of people I work with. With impact play, as a beginner, can be tricky to know where to aim. With hand spanking or with using any kind of implement like a riding crop or a cane, placement of each stroke is very important. So the first thing you should do before starting is, whether your model is experienced or not, ask her which part of her she's expecting to receive impact play on. Because spanking someone's butt is not the same as spanking their legs or slapping them around the face, and it's important to discuss that so you know you're both on the same page. Once you've done that, you should be good to go. But here's the thing, it's a thing that happens to me so often that I want to make this point, because the fact that it happens to me so much makes me think it's quite prevalent. Almost any model would forgive one wayward stroke. But the thing with impact play of all sorts is it leaves marks, so as long as there is exposed skin, you can see whether you've hit in the right place or not. So if you've hit someone with a riding crop or a cane and it's wrapped too far around their hip, all you need to do is look at the mark you've left and it will tell you whether you're being accurate or not. So whereas one stroke that goes astray is forgivable, in my opinion, unless it's incredibly hard, once you've done one in the wrong place, it's completely unacceptable to do any more in the wrong place, because you can see the mark that you've left and you need to adjust. A lot of errors people make with impact play are going either too high on the bottom, so approaching the lower back, too low, so strokes land on the legs, which is both more painful and marks for longer, or wrapping around the far hip, which is normally because you're just standing too close. Look at your marks after the first stroke. Check, is it hitting the model where you and she were expecting? If not, you need to change your positioning, because the second or third stroke that wraps around my hip is not one I'll be forgiving in the same way that I'd forgive the first, and the chances of me coming back for more impact play with you are massively diminished. Most rope injuries, in my experience, happen when you're untying, and the most common of those is hitting the model in the face with the ends of the rope, because when you hurry, it's very easy for the ends of the rope to function like a whip. The ends of the ropes can be absolutely lethal, and in order to avoid hitting the model somewhere sensitive with the ends of the rope travelling at a massive speed, you just need to take your time. It's very tempting to rush taking the rope off, one, because it's not exciting, and two, because you want to get the model comfortable. But it's very important to be measured in your approach to that, because it can be extremely painful and you really don't want to finish a lovely bondage shoot by hitting someone in the eye with the end of some rope. And finally, it's not finally, almost finally, after the shoot finishes, your first priority should be your model, not your equipment. So recharging your battery, turning your camera off, turning the lights off, reading your memory card. None of that stuff is important until you've untied your model. I shouldn't have to say this, and yet it's happened to me plenty of times, and so I just want to reiterate. I know most people will know this, but untying your model gives her a signal that you care about her, and the chances that you'll then be allowed to tie her up again are much higher. Now, this is a tricky thing to talk about. It's uncomfortable, but most of us do find ourselves doing a thing that is generally not seen as best practice. We do bondage shoots when it's just us and the model. There's just two of us there. Now, best practice would be to always have someone else there in case someone collapses or in case there's some kind of emergency. But practically, we all know in the modelling photography community that that often isn't practical. Most of us can't afford an assistant, most of us don't bring a chaperone. And so fortunately there is another option these days, which is just having your smartphone on set, so you can say, hey Siri, call 999. And I think it's a really great option, and it's something I just do for all my shoots now. It's a fabulous innovation for this specific situation, and I don't think there's much excuse for not employing it. It's perfectly reasonable not to want to pay extra people to be on set, but I do think it's worth always considering the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario often, when I think it through, is the photographer collapsing or being knocked unconscious while I'm tied up and can't help either him or myself. So trying to mitigate that situation is a really sensible one. And finally, the joke you should never, ever try. Jokes while someone's tied up are a dangerous business anyway, but the joke you should never try, and it's such a shame that I'm still having to say this, is don't ever pretend you're not going to untie her. It's the most crass, stupid, crude, ubiquitous, lazy joke. It's not funny, and models who don't know you and who've just been tied up by you are likely to be a bit nervous. The last thing you should be wanting to do is make them more uncomfortable. BDSM is fundamentally a trust exercise, and if you're using that lazy, stupid, old joke, you're just going to erode that trust. Maybe a little bit, maybe a lot, but it's terribly crass, and the best bondage producers I work with are the ones I trust the most, and they don't do that kind of thing. And so if you have ambitions to be one of the best bondage riggers or producers that a model's ever worked with, jokes like that I don't think have a place. And on that humorless note, that's the end of my video. Thank you as always for supporting me. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Please comment. I especially love hearing from other models who've had either similar or very different experiences, and it would be great to hear from riggers and producers about things you think are important as well, either because you've done them wrong and learned, or because you've thought of some things that I've not thought of. Obviously this isn't an exhaustive list, and I would love to hear opinions from my peers and colleagues. Thank you as always. I'll be back soon. I've got many exciting things happening this year, and I will update you all here on Ariel's Twilight Years. Goodbye now. Goodbye. Bye.